Welcome to Nature Calls, Conversations from the Hudson Valley. Our team's goal is to present science-based information about gardening and all things nature in New York's Hudson Valley. Hosts Jean and Tim, along with team members
Teresa, Linda, and Annie,
are master gardener volunteers for New York's Columbia and Greene counties. So if you're interested in gardening or nature, or nuggets of information about what's happening outside your door, settle in. Enjoy the conversation. Whatever the season, we have something to say.
Hi, and welcome back to Good Plant, Bad Plant, where we focus on 2 plants per episode, one that's ecologically valuable, and one plant on the other end of the spectrum that's invasive or noxious weed. Thus, Good Plant, Bad Plant. I'm your host, Tim Kennelty. Today I'm going to switch things up a bit because the good plant may be one that you've never heard of or haven't grown. But trust me, if you have some room and like bold plants, you're going to like this one. And the bad plant is one you probably do know because until recently it was being sold in garden centers and it has been a regular feature in many people's landscapes. But my advice is don't ever plant it, and you may just want to think about getting rid of it if you do have it. Okay, big reveal. The good plant is Ironweed and the bad plant is Japanese Barberry. As always, let's start with the good guy. Ironweed is in the Asteraceae family, or the daisy family. There are quite a few different species of ironweed that are great candidates for your garden, especially if you're interested in supporting pollinators. So you may find Vernonia fasciculata, common ironweed, Vernonia gigantea, giant ironweed, and one that we see most in our area, Vernonia noveboracensis, New York ironweed. The biggest difference among these is really the size. New York ironweed can grow to a whopping 5 to 8 feet tall in a single season, with a profusion of small, brilliant purple blossoms in the late summer garden. Gigantea can get even bigger. The species Vernonia is named for the British botanist William Vernon, who collected plants in the New World in the 1600s. The plant most likely gets its common name, ironweed, from its constitution. It's a really tough plant, or more likely for its stem and root tissue. Carol Otteson in the Native Plant Primer recommends root divisions be made with an axe or a chainsaw. I actually moved some large plants last fall, and it was quite a chore. I used a pickaxe. So you probably know by now that I really like bold plants, and that's why ironweed is one of my favorites. With its impressive height and beautiful purple flowers appearing on the tops of the stems, this is a great plant for the back of the border. And it's a great plant to add some structure to your perennial bed. I've even seen it used as an allay or almost a maze in a beautiful display I visited a few years ago. And man, oh man, is it a pollinator plant. When it blooms in late summer to early fall, it's covered in both large and smaller butterflies, as well as native bees. And the small seeds that develop in the fall are readily eaten by a variety of birds. This is a clump-forming plant that is not picky about soils. I've seen volunteers growing in gravel driveways, and it can take both wet and dry conditions, provided it's planted in a sunny location. And if you're reluctant to spend a lot of money on perennials, know that this is a plant that reliably returns year after year and is relatively deer resistant. And if you like free plants, and really, who doesn't, ironweed is a prolific self-seeder. Just move the seedlings when they're small to a new location. Otherwise, getting all the root mass may be a challenge. I've started whole new areas of ironweed in my perennial beds with just a few wayward seedlings relocated in the spring. One more great thing about this plant is that you can reduce its height by cutting off the tops in late spring to early summer. This plant can take it and will even branch out more and may produce more flowers. That way you can have multiple ironweed plants at varying heights to even have more interest in your garden. So if you're a purple lover and want a really tough, bold pollinator plant, head to the bees in the perennial section of your nursery and pick up an ironweed for your garden. The bees, butterflies, and birds will thank you. And now for the bad plant, Japanese Barberry. If you've been gardening for a while or inherited an established garden, you probably know this plant and maybe even like it for its toughness. Japanese Barberry, or Berberis thunbergii, is thought to have been introduced to the United States in 1875, when seeds were sent from Russia to the Arnold Arboretum in Boston. The following year, it was planted in the New York Botanical Garden. It was subsequently promoted and planted as a substitute for Berberis vulgaris. That plant, common barberry, was brought to the New World by settlers in the 1600s, but was almost completely eradicated when it was found to be responsible for failing wheat crops. So we substituted one invasive plant for another. Japanese barberry is a deciduous shrub that can grow from 3 to 8 feet tall. It has small, alternate oval leaves in shades of green to bluish to burgundy, with simple spines along its stems. It has pale yellow blossoms in spring and bright red fruits that occur from July to October. The plant is drought-resistant and can grow in a variety of soils in sun and shade. It spreads rapidly through seed dispersal from birds and can spread vegetatively through root creeping and tip rooting. So like many invasive shrubs, because of its rapid spread and lack of natural controls like deer, it can push out native vegetation and form monocultures. However, this is not the only problem with Japanese barberry. It's also been linked to deer ticks and Lyme disease. In areas with large populations of Japanese barberry, there can be a 90% increase in Lyme and related diseases carried by ticks. This is most likely because the plant is an excellent habitat for white-footed mice, the larval deer tick's host, providing cover and high humidity. Japanese barberry has been linked to invasive earthworms and increased soil erosion as well. As to management, smaller shrubs can be pulled in spring and fall when the soil is more moist. For larger infestations, you may also want to consider herbicides. If you have the plant as an ornamental specimen in your garden, I recommend removing it, and please don't compost it if it's fruiting, as you may cause further spread. Japanese barberry is prohibited from sale in New York State. I'll include links to identification and management on our website. All in all, a plant that you really don't want in your garden and an invasive that you want to manage to reduce or eliminate if possible in your landscape. So that's it for another edition of Good Plant, Bad Plant. And remember, as a gardener, you really can make a difference. If you want to support wildlife, plant natives.
You're listening to Nature Calls, conversations from the Hudson Valley.
Welcome to Good Plant, Bad Plant, where we focus on 2 plants per episode, one that's ecologically valuable and one that's at the other end of the spectrum. That is, it's invasive or a noxious weed. Thus, Good Plant, Bad Plant. I'm your host, Tim Kennelty. In this episode, we're going to talk about 2 A plants, one good plant and one bad. The good plant is the beautiful and beneficial late-blooming aster, and the bad one is one that some people think is beautiful, but it's really a nasty character, tree of heaven. Or if we're talking Latin, its A name is Ailanthus altissima. So let's start with the good plant, the genus Aster. I must confess that what we think of as our native asters, like the commonly called New England or New York fall-blooming asters, are no longer in the botanical world referred to as, well, asters. You may not know this, but every 5 years the International Botanical Congress meets to update naming nomenclature for plants. Well, a few years ago they decided that Eurasian and American asters were different enough to be classified with different genuses. Thus, the roughly 180 American or New World asters were forced to find new names under different genera. I tell you this only because if you go to the nursery looking for asters, you're most likely going to be looking under the Latin name Symphotrichum. Don't despair, most nurseries still refer to these beautiful plants as asters, and for simplicity's sake, so am I. Okay, enough about naming. Why am I talking about asters? Because they are such great garden plants. If you want vibrant color in shades of purple and pink and even white, and you want to support pollinators, you really should think about adding asters to your garden. Both New England and New York asters are native to the Northeast and thrive in a wide range of growing conditions. In general, they prefer full sun and well-drained soil and are relatively easy to grow. New England asters have full plump blooms and woody stems, while New York asters have smooth leaves and thinner stems. There are many, many cultivars and subcategories of asters ranging in height from 1 to 6 feet. Most, however, are perennial, have daisy-like colorful flowers, and bloom anytime between August and October. I've even had asters in my Hudson Valley garden blooming at Thanksgiving. Asters can be nibbled on by rabbits and deer, so you should really keep that in mind when placing them in the garden. Some of my favorite cultivars are Purple Cloud, Kickin' Carmen Red, and Elma Pachki. But there are countless others, and I think it's safe to say there's a cultivar for every taste. Besides being beautiful, asters attract and support many late-season pollinators in the garden. And in the winter, don't cut them back as they provide food and shelter for many bird species and small mammals. They are even a host plant for painted lady and pearl crescent butterflies. In fact, Doug Tallamy includes asters on his keystone species list, which is a group of plants that are the most important for supporting wildlife. So if you need some beautiful late-season color and you want to be kind to the birds and bees, plant some asters in your garden. Now for the really bad actor, the inappropriately named Tree of Heaven, or Ailanthus altissima. And of course, when I say bad actor, it's not the plant's fault that it's an invasive pest in our area. For any invasive non-native plant, some human brought it to our shores thinking it was beautiful, a food source, or had medicinal value. Tree of Heaven, which is native to China, was first introduced in Philadelphia in the late 1700s. Thereafter, it was widely planted in urban areas from New York City to Washington, D.C. At the time, it was thought to be an attractive ornamental tree that was fast-growing and tolerated a wide range of conditions. By the early 1900s, attitudes toward this plant began to change because of its weedy nature and foul odor. Today, it's thought to be highly invasive. More about that in a minute. Tree of Heaven is a fast-growing deciduous tree that can reach heights of 80 to 100 feet. Its leaves have a central stem with multiple lance-shaped leaflets on either side. When crushed, the leaves have a strong, offensive odor. The tree's leaves closely resemble those of two natives, black walnut and sumacs. I have all three on my property, and it can be really confusing. The main difference is that both black walnut and sumac leaves are serrated, while Tree of Heaven leaves have margins that are smooth. Like many invasive plants, Tree of Heaven has multiple reproductive strategies. Female trees can produce more than 300,000 seeds that are wind dispersed. Individual trees spread through aggressive root suckering. A new sprout can emerge as much as 50 feet away from the tree. In addition, leaves, roots, and bark of the tree contain allelopathic chemicals which inhibit establishment of native plants. So as you can imagine, this plant can be highly destructive to native ecosystems, pushing out valuable plants and often forming monocultures. This plant has one more bad trait. It is the primary host of the spotted lanternfly. This is a highly destructive invasive insect which is on the verge of establishing itself in our area. So if you identify Tree of Heaven in your yard, what should you do? If you have small shoots, you can pull them when the soil is damp, but make sure you remove all of the underground shoot or the plant will resprout. For larger stands, cutting or mowing is usually ineffective because the plant will quickly reproduce a large number of resprouts. For effective control, you'll probably need to use herbicides. As always, use caution and read all the labels and follow the instructions. I'm including links about this plant with more information on identification and control. So that's it for another edition of Good Plant, Bad Plant. And as always, if you want to support wildlife in your yard, plant those natives.
You're listening to Nature Calls, conversations from the Hudson Valley.
Hi, welcome back to Good Plant, Bad Plant, where we focus on 2 plants per episode, one that's ecologically valuable and one that's at the other end of the spectrum. That is, it's invasive or a noxious weed. Thus, Good Plant, Bad Plant. I'm your host, Tim Kennelty. Normally on Good Plant, Bad Plant, we talk about 2 totally different genuses and species. Today, we're going to talk about one genus, Viburnums, and contrary to popular belief, there are good and bad viburnums. While perhaps a better way to describe this, that there is a group of native viburnums that are beautiful and beneficial. You should think about planting them, or if you already have them, encouraging them in your landscape. On the other hand, there's a group of non-native viburnums, either European or Asian viburnums, that can be weedy and even invasive. You should not be planting these, and even, dare I say, you should be considering removing them from your landscape. More about these in a few minutes. So, all viburnums are not created equal, and this is not a topic I normally hear about, so hopefully we'll all learn something today. So let's start with the good viburnums. And again, by good, I mean the natives that have co-evolved with all of the other critters in your yard, like bees, butterflies, and birds. And because they have been living together and co-evolving, they often have mutually beneficial relationships, or are even essential to each other's existence. Generally, native viburnums as a genus are large shrubs or small trees that are spring flowering with plentiful, attractive fruit in the fall that is available just at the time that migrating birds need to fatten up to start their journey south, or for those who stick around to get enough nutrition to get them through the winter. And because these natives co-evolved with the birds, their fruit, unlike non-native shrubs, is composed of fats and proteins, which is just what they need for that journey or for that long winter. So which native viburnums am I talking about? Let's start with arrowwood viburnums, or Viburnum dentatum. This is an upright, multi-stemmed deciduous shrub that grows 6 to 10 feet high and wide. It's rugged, reliable plant that grows well in full sun to part shade in a variety of soils, including clay, and it will even do well under black walnut trees. It has flat white flowers in late spring that support pollinators that give way to blue-black berry drupes that are highly attractive to a long list of bird species. It's also the host plant for the spring azure and many other butterfly species, and moss species as well. An added bonus, like many native viburnums, arrowwood has attractive burgundy foliage in the fall. There's also blackhaw viburnum, or Viburnum prunifolium, which grows a bit taller, about 12 to 15 feet, and I would consider this more a small tree than a shrub. Like the arrowwood, this is a tough plant that can take sun or partial shade, thrive in a variety of soils, and can take some drought. It's an equally good wildlife plant, benefiting pollinators with its attractive white flowers in May and migrating birds in the fall. Or, if you have really dry soil, check out American cranberry bush, or Viburnum trilobum. This plant's a great alternative to the popular but now considered invasive European cranberry bush, Viburnum opulus. If I've confused you, hold on, because you can easily discover the difference between these two with a quick Google search. More to come when we talk about the bad guys. American cranberry bush is again more a small tree, which can grow to 15 feet and has beautiful bright red fruits. Unlike the fruit of the other 2 viburnums we talked about, the American cranberry bush fruit often persists through the winter, and then is a food source for birds in the late winter, early spring, when the nourishment is really scarce out there. And don't forget 2 other great native viburnums, nannyberry, one of my favorites, Viburnum lentago, and hobblebush, or Viburnum lantanoides, both terrific, but a little bit harder to find in commerce. Okay, now for the not-so-good viburnums. European and Asian viburnums have been in commerce for decades, and so it's really possible you have some of these on your property or you've planted them yourself. I know I have. We're beginning to realize that many of these non-native viburnums not only provide little wildlife value in the landscape, but in many cases they're invasive. If you don't know what species of viburnum you have on your property, pull out the Seek app on your phone or just ask a master gardener. We're always happy to help. Once you've identified the species, usually a quick Google search will tell you whether the species is native to North America or somewhere else. Suffice it to say that you should be wary if you have non-native viburnums. Not all of them are officially recognized as invasive, but as we learn more, my guess is that more non-native viburnums will be found to be, at the very least, weedy and most likely invasive. Already 3 species are included on our own Capital District PRISM invasive species list. They are linden viburnum, Viburnum dilatatum, Siebold's viburnum, Viburnum sieboldii, and what you're most likely to have in your garden, Japanese snowball or double file viburnum, Viburnum plicatum. This last viburnum is one of the very most popular for home gardeners. I had a whole stand of them in my front yard until I started finding many of them out, and they had escaped into the woods. And that's the problem with invasive plant species. They escape into our woodlands and disturbed areas and push out all of the beneficial native plants. It's a tough decision, but I either dug out or cut back all my double file viburnums. If you don't have the nerve or heart to do this and you have double files, at least cut back flowers after they bloom to prevent the plants from fruiting. The birds are very good at distributing the seeds of non-native viburnums, and very quickly you will have a problem. Also considered invasive in many states and national lists, but not yet making it to the New York State invasive species list yet, are European cranberry bush, Viburnum opulus, and leatherleaf viburnum, Viburnum rhytidophyllum. If you have these, please keep an eye on them. I know it's not easy to get rid of a plant that you love and perhaps you've even coddled over the years. Full disclosure, even though I long ago got rid of my linden and double file viburnums in my landscape, I still have a really nice leatherleaf viburnum by my deck, and I've always really liked this. The more I read and learn about the potential for these species being invasive, however, the more likely it will be that I'll be out there with my saw to make sure I'm not responsible for causing some real ecological damage. As I always say, once you know that a species is invasive and potentially harmful, you just can't unknow it. So do yourself and your ecosystem a favor, learn what viburnum species you have on your property, and act responsibly. There are plenty of beautiful native viburnums out there to ease your pain. That's it for another episode of Good Plant, Bad Plant. And as always, if you want to support wildlife, plant natives.
That concludes another episode of Nature Calls, Conversations from the Hudson Valley. We would like to thank Sandra Powers and Devin Connolly from Cornell Cooperative Extension of Columbia and Greene Counties for production support. And a special thank you to our listeners for joining us on this episode of Nature Calls, Conversations from the Hudson Valley. You can find links to any of the topics mentioned in this episode at our website at ccecolumbiagreen.org. Comments and suggestions for future topics may be directed to us at columbiagreenmgb@cornell.edu or on the CCE Master Gardener Volunteers of Columbia and Greene Counties Facebook page. For more information about Cornell Cooperative Extension of Columbia and Greene Counties, visit our website at ccecolumbiagreen.org or visit us in Hudson or in Acre. Cornell Cooperative Extension provides equal programming and employment opportunities.